Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I'm going to be showing you ILNP's pop collection for spring. First off, I want to give a big thank you to ILNP for sponsoring this video. So while that means I'm being paid to swatch and share these with you all, my thoughts and opinions are honest and my own, the same as with my non-sponsored videos. So the pop collection features an all magnetic lineup of 6 polishes and 1 topper, obviously inspired by all the fizzy, carbonated, and refreshing feelings of your favorite soda. So as always, I will share a bit more about these at the end of the video after comparisons, but for now, let me show you the swatches. The first polish we have is Shirley, and this one is described as a vivid red magnetic with holographic sparkle. This had a really great formula. It's just very pigmented, a little bit on the jelly leaning side, so there is a touch of sheerness that you can see on the first coat, but it provided excellent coverage, very even across the board, and I found it to be pretty much opaque for me in 2 coats. I think if you look close enough, you can see a hint of nail line, but again, the base is pretty pigmented where it's obscured for the most part. So personally, I didn't think it warranted a 3rd coat, but if your nails are longer, you might need one. And here I'm showing a side-by-side of Shirley in the unmagnetized state on the left and then with the velvet effect on the right. And for my full hand swatch, I'm showing the glass bead on my pointer, velvet on my middle, cat eye on my ring, and unmagnetized on my pinky. Though as I'm sure you can tell, it was a little hard to see the magnetic effect while I was holding the bottle, so I had to flip my hand around. But yeah, I thought this one was so gorgeous. I don't usually love a bright, bold red, but this one was super stunning. Next we have Grape Soda, which is described as a saturated grape purple magnetic with a holographic sparkle. Even though these do technically all have the same kind of formula or finish, I actually found that this one was slightly more sheer on the first coat, where it wasn't as pigmented or even coverage, or I guess it didn't self-level as nicely. You can see I have some light spots, especially near the middle or edges of my nail. So I went with a slightly thicker second coat and was a little bit more careful with my application just to see if I could really even everything out, and I think I did for the most part. At least I couldn't really see much visible nail line, especially compared to the last shade, probably since this is a little bit darker. But again, since it is jelly leaning in the formula, you might need a 3rd coat if you happen to do or prefer thinner coats. And actually for my full hand swatch, where I did the 2 coats with a glossy top coat, I feel like you can see some light spots on some of my nails, so this one I would call a 2 to 3 coater. For whatever reason, I just didn't find it as self-leveling as the other polishes in the collection, but I couldn't be too mad at it because I just loved the shade of purple, especially in the magnetic formula. I just thought it was so mesmerizing. Then we have Blue Fizz, which is described as a vivid blue magnetic with a holographic sparkle. And let me say off the top, this one is not picking up color accurate. I think I would say that this is like a cerulean leaning blue. It's just that particular shade of blue that just doesn't capture accurately on my iPhone. So I'm sorry about that, but it is super gorgeous, incredibly vivid in color. I personally found this one to be most similar to Shirley, the first shade, where it had just great pigmentation and coverage and was practically opaque in 2 coats. There's again that hint of nail line, but it's just not enough to warrant a 3rd for me personally. And yeah, I just really enjoyed this one. The color was gorgeous. I loved how it looked in any kind of magnetized state. I know this isn't a fine particle magnetic or anything, but there's something about the finish, especially with the hollow sparkle in the background, that just makes it feel very crisp to me. Up next we have Orange Pop, which is a juicy orange magnetic with holographic sparkle. And I was kind of surprised to see that we're getting another orange magnetic, although I guess that's true for the blues and reds. But orange is just one of the more lesser appreciated colors when it comes to nail polish, but I always love them, and I feel like ILNP does such a great job with their oranges, and this one is no exception. The color is just so vibrant vibrant, so incredibly juicy. I think this is what I would call a very true mid-toned orange. Maybe it's a little bit on the warmer side. It's not as yellow leaning, but I could also potentially see it being neutral at the same time. And yeah, this had a fantastic formula. I would say similar to the red and blue so far, where it's just so incredibly pigmented and very even coverage on the first coat alone, and it built up to be almost fully opaque on the 2 coats, but again, you might need 3 depending on your application. Also, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like the magnetic effect in this one was a little bit weaker maybe compared to the others, where all of them to begin with aren't super contrasty because they all have the silver magnetic, but I just noticed that this one was a little bit more subtle. And the last polish is Cherry Cola, which is described as a warm cola brown magnetic with holographic sparkle. I knew this was going to be my top favorite from the collection. I just love brown polishes. I love browns that have this really warm red undertone to them. I don't really drink soda anymore, but I used to love a nice cherry cola, so it's just so perfect, so refreshing. The formula on this was nice and easy to work with like the others. I think coverage-wise, I found it somewhere in between the rest of the polishes and Grape Soda, where that one was the more uneven one, or like the least self-leveling. So this one had a little bit of that vibe on the first coat, but it did build up really nicely and beautifully in 2 coats, where it's just so full coverage and rich. And because the color is a little bit darker, I found that it obscures the nail line even more, but again, there's still some slight squishiness to it since it is a jelly, which I think is most obvious in direct sunlight, but it just looks so gorgeous. You can also see that it is very, very red leaning. It's not like a true brown at all, where I think I would call this more of a red with a brown undertone as opposed to a brown with a red undertone, but I think doing a 3rd coat would deepen the color even more if that's what you wanted. And rounding out the collection is Bubbly, which is the magnetic topper. So this is described as a silver magnetic topper with holographic sparkle. So it's essentially what's inside all of the other polishes in the collection, just with their tinted jelly bases. So here I'm showing it in 1 coat over a sheer pink, and I'll be showing it in 1 coat over white and black as well. Since the magnetic and the holographic sparkle are both silver, there is going to be a little bit of a gray cast to it. So it's not going to look as great over a sheer pink, white, or any kind of lighter color. At least that's not my personal preference. I think it looks the best over black or any other kind of darker color. So for my full hand swatch, I did the same magnetizing styles as I mentioned earlier, with the glass bead on my pointer, velvet on my middle, cat eye on my ring, and unmagnetized on my pinky, all over black, just to show you the strongest contrast. And here is my thumb swatch collage of ILNP's Pop collection, worn in 2 coats in the cat eye effect, except for Bubbly, which is 1 coat over a sheer pink base. Now getting into comparisons, we're starting with Shirley and looking at it next to Poison and Be Mine, which are 2 of ILNP's red magnetics. Poison is a much darker, almost blackened red base, while Be Mine is a little closer in value, but it's also a little bit more muted at the same time and slightly more raspberry in color, but it does have a red background shimmer, which makes it kind of similar to Shirley. Next, I wanted to show Shirley next to Mooncat's Your Heart's a Black Hole, which is a pretty true red magnetic with a silver magnetic pigment and a hollow sparkle in the back, but the hollow is more dainty instead of a little micro flake. So I think formula-wise, it reminded me the most of Holo Taco's Flirt Alert, which is a hot pink color, but on the nail, it actually looks extremely similar to Shirley, where I had such a hard time telling them apart, especially in the bases, but you can see see the pink shimmer in Holo Taco. And then for some other reds, I wanted to see this next to Merlot and Joy, which are these pigmented jelly bases that have holographic flakes in the background. So they're not magnetic, but I just thought color-wise, these were really close. I mean, even in the bottles, they also looked extremely similar. So I'm showing Shirley unmagnetized here, and I would say it looks the most similar to Joy, being that bright, almost cherry red color. Merlot is just a little bit deeper, but I figured since they do look so similar with the jelly and the hollow flakies, I could use Bubbly on top of these two polishes to see if I could recreate Shirley, and it was pretty close. It just looks a little more silver. And lastly, for reference, I wanted to show Shirley next to Holo Taco's Red Licorice and Cracked Polish's 23 Flavors. Red Licorice is just a red linear holo that's slightly more pink leaning, I want to say, while 23 Flavors is closer in terms of that bright red color, but maybe it's a little bit more vibrant. Not to mention, it's just a different formula. Again, this is just for color reference. Next, for Grape Soda, I first pulled out Grapevine since it has that pigmented, jelly, hollow, flaky formula, but that one's a bit more blue leaning, kind of an indigo color. So I only ended up comparing it on my nail next to Vanity, which is much closer in terms of color. I want to say these are nearly the exact same. Maybe Vanity is a touch warmer, but they're just so incredibly close. The only other difference is that Vanity also has these golden metallic flakes, but once you add Bubbly on top, they look really similar. The only other purple magnetic that I had was Holo Taco's Queen's Curse, which I completely misremembered how purple this was because it actually has more of a blackened base, but the magnetic shimmer is purple. So while it does have the silver hollow flakes in the background, the base is just too dark to be close at all. And for reference, Mooncat's Antifragile is much more blue toned in color. For some other somewhat similar purples, I figured I could show this next to Holo Taco's Antihero, which was from their Retro Anniversary collection. It's kind of this pigmented jelly base with a silver hollow glitter, but as I'm sure you can see, it's a much brighter and more warm tone of purple, so not similar at all. But that made me think I could try to do a recreation attempt using Holo Taco's Grape Expectations from their recent jelly sandwich collection. But since it's more sheer, I started with 2 coats of the Holo Taco, did 1 coat of ILNP's Bubbly, and then 1 more coat of Holo Taco, but it's still not as dark as the ILNP. Moving on to Blue Fizz, we of course are looking at it next to Adrian, which is the most recent blue magnetic that came out in the Playground collection, as well as 0 Degrees, which was their very first blue magnetic that came out a couple of winters ago. Keep in mind, Blue Fizz is more of a cerulean color. It's the only one not picking up color accurate, so it's not as similar to Adrian as it might look here. But yeah, these are definitely overall very different. I would say the closest in terms of the blue color is ILNP's Cannonball, which had come out a couple of summers ago, but it's a very different finish, being this very tiny micro metallic flaky with a little bit of a hollow sparkle. So depending on how you magnetize Blue Fizz, it might look similar. For some Holo Taco comparisons, I pulled out Blue Freezie, which is the blue linear holographic on the left, and Sky Lounge, which is the micro metallic flaky on the right from last year's Bon Voyage collection. Again, they might look kind of similar on camera here, but in real life you can see a difference with the color of Blue Fizz. And lastly, I wanted to show it next to Holo Taco's Be Kind Rewind from their Retro Anniversary collection, since it's that pigmented jelly base with a holographic micro glitter. I knew it wasn't going to be an exact dupe by any means because the Holo Taco is just much lighter and brighter in color, but once you do the magnetic on top, the visual effect looks really similar. Next, for Orange Pop, here it is next to ILNP's Amber, which is their first orange magnetic. That one's in a more sheer glassy jelly base, and it also has this golden shimmer and microflake in the background, but obviously the biggest difference is the shade of orange, where it's more yellow leaning in color, while Holo Taco's Orange Drink is a linear holo in a much more neutral shade of orange. I guess it's not as warm as Orange Pop. For some other oranges that I thought would be a little closer, I first pulled out Hidden Path since it had that jelly, hollow, flaky formula, but that has a little bit more of this caramel kind of color to it. So I think the closest orange in terms of color is Pumpkin Patch, even though that has a micro flake or a large shimmer particle finish. It also has that flash of gold from the shimmer as well. For some other recreation attempts, I first pulled out Tangerine Heat, which is a pretty bright, almost mid-tone shade of orange, which is honestly more similar to Holo Taco's Box Office Bomb, again from that retro anniversary collection. So while these can be sort of recreated with the visual effect, the color is just not there. So then that made me think the closer shade of orange would be Holo Taco's In My Peelings from the Jelly Sandwich collection, since that one is so much deeper and warmer, and it was actually somewhat close. I would say the ILNP is a little bit darker, but for my recreation attempt, I would probably do a second coat of bubbly just to add some more flakes in the background. Next for Cherry Cola, I first pulled out Reindeer Crossing and Velveteen just to show you how these compare to some other of ILNP's brown magnetics. Cherry Cola is definitely very, very red. So for some other potentially closer shades, I pulled out Holo Taco's Fairy Tale, which is a dark brown magnetic, but it's much more of a true brown. There's no red undertone to it. So for a reddish brown color, I thought it was going to be closer to Shapeshifter, which is a different finish, but Shapeshifter is a bit more brown and darker overall. So yeah, maybe I wouldn't agree with calling Cherry Cola a warm brown. It's definitely very red, but the closest shade that I have to this is Ethereal's Beware from a previous fall collection. They look like they could be dupes from the bottle alone, and they looked really similar on the first coat. I wish I had taken a clip of that, but once you do the second coat, Ethereal becomes much darker, and it's also missing the hollow flakes in the background, but definitely extremely close color-wise. And lastly for bubbly, I have Holo Taco's Holo Magnetic Taco on the left, as well as their regular magnetic taco, which is no longer around, on the right. The Holo version does have the hollow flakes in the background, and the magnetic stripe is also supposed to be holographic, but it is a little bit more diffused looking. It's not as crisp as the regular magnetic taco. So I think if you do have that and then a hollow flaky topper, you can kind of recreate bubbly. I'm using one from Bluebird from forever ago, and it's a little bit too dense compared to bubbly, so you might have to be careful with your application, but overall I think you could recreate it. Bubbly is pretty straightforward, again with just being a silver magnetic stripe and the hollow flakes in the background. And for fun, I wanted to include a clip under flash just so you can actually see the rainbow hollow twinkle. And lastly, I wanted to include some photos of Cirque's Starry Eyed, since that's another magnetic with a hollow background, but that one wasn't as crisp of a magnetic. If anything, it's more similar to Holo Taco's Holo Magnetic Taco in that way, being slightly more diffused, but Cirque's is much more subtle. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons of ILNP's Pop collection. This is going to be launching this Friday, April 17th, and for the first few days, it will be available for a discounted pre-order before retailing for $12.50 each. So I will have ILNP's website linked down below if you do want to check these out. But yeah, I can't wait to hear what you think of these because I really enjoyed them. I love the inspiration and think it's so fun, especially to see their interpretation, which I know might be repetitive having them all be magnetics, but as you might know, I really love ILNP's magnetic formula. At least generally speaking, there might be like one or two polishes that aren't my favorite from their magnetics because they're a little bit sheerer, but overall, I find that their magnetics have that perfect or like ideal balance that I'm looking for between really pigmented jelly leaning bases and having those little holographic flakes in the background. So naturally, I really enjoyed these because they were just hitting all all of those boxes for me. It's also nice to see that they finally came out with their own magnetic topper, because there are a couple of them on the market already. And like I said, I love having that little hollow sparkle in the background, and I feel like this was a really good combination where the magnetic itself is still very crisp, but the hollow is also really sparkly, but providing like a subtle twinkle that isn't too overpowering. And yeah, back to the polishes, like I mentioned, Cherry Cola is my favorite. I just love those reddy brown kind of colors. I think they're just so beautiful and rich. And I also really loved Orange Pop, because as you might know, I also really love an orange nail polish. And at first I was a little surprised to see that one, because ILNP already has Amber, which is their first kind of orange magnetic, and that's not a polish that we see often in the market. So for them to come out with another one, you know, it sort of felt a little repetitive, but as you saw in the comparison portion, they are incredibly different shades of orange. So I personally am a fan of that. I know there might be some recency bias, but I think I might skew towards liking Orange Pop a little bit more than Amber. And I'm also really happy to see like a pure purple magnetic with Grape Soda, because there are a lot of purple magnetic pigments, but then the bases are usually black, just because it provides like, you know, a really nice contrast, which I think is the only sort of, I don't want to say complaint, because it doesn't bother me too much, but the fact that these are generally more subtle when it comes to their magnetic finishes. So I can see how some people might not like these, especially if you're more interested in something that's color shifty, maybe more similar to their Illusions collection last summer, which had these like multi-chrome magnetic formulas. Those are overall just a lot more colorful and color shifty compared to these, but like I said, I do really like these, so I would love to know what you think down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!